Again, just kind of like sharing this on my statuses. Oh. Get the message that I want. I think that's creative enough, right? That counts. Oh boy. So, anyway, so I guess basically, like, let me like pull up some other things because it makes a lot more sense. So, forgot how to open a new window. No, that's not it. Not type. How do I like? It changes my stuff like all the time. Like I'll like log into Emacs for the first time in like 2 days, and like everything is like completely inverted and nothing works anymore, and it's really irritating. There we go. Hey, look at that. Except that's still not really what I wanted. What does that mean? Go away. I don't understand anymore. Really? Oh, there we go. Yay. This is like really irritating. Sometimes it's like Control X4. Sometimes it's Control X3. It really depends on the day of the week, I guess. I don't really get it, but anyway. So I'm gonna kind of like open up this other thing. And I guess like this kind of like, just gonna close that window. Bring this down here. Gonna do the thing. There we go. So I guess I have all these like weird thoughts. It tends to help if I stop smoking weed. I don't like have as many like crazy off the rails thoughts. They're actually not crazy. They're actually beautiful, but I just don't have time. They're too big. I guess I was thinking about like on becoming a philosopher. I've just always like I've been thinking a lot about like metaphysics and stuff like that, and I was thinking about this stuff even before I knew really like what metaphysics was. I should have known what that was in high school, but I didn't. And I just, like I always wanted to like know like how do I model like every problem, like what is like the most like general like means of modeling anything, like how can I like really abstract any like concept so that I can like make it simpler and easier to reason about. And I thought I kept getting like more and more and more general, and it was always useful to like think about like the self similarity in things. And then I thought about like like you keep getting like more and more meta and more self-similar, and like so what is like the most like self-similar means of modeling stuff, like how, like what is the most general like means of like modeling stuff? And I mean I really think like you get to like category theory and that and math and stuff like that, and that's like really the most general means of modeling things, and you kind of escape this like tree-based means of like modeling things. It's kind of hard to explain. But it's really useful like once you do kind of explain it, or once you do kind of understand it. And so like because when I first learned to program, I learned object-oriented programming. You have like this like thing at the top, and then you can have like subclasses, and it kind of branches out, and it kind of like branches out again, and it kind of branches out. There's so many limitations with that that you can't really like model anything with that kind of like tree-based, you know, kind of like tree-based idea. And then I started like discovering, thinking about like self-similarity and kind of like getting to the meta of things, and like I started like discovering meta phenomena and what I call epiphenomena. And epi is kind of like the opposite of meta. Like meta is a Greek prefix that means like after or like kind of like within. Um, Literally, it means after. Like physics, and it best example of that it comes from like I believe it's Plato's. No, it's not Plato's physics. It's uh, maybe it is Plato's. What was Aristotle's? Maybe it's not Aristotle. I don't know. Anyway, the prefix meta means after, but it can also mean like within, and then epa is kind of the opposite. And so they're like ways of describing like, so if you're looking for the metadata within data, that's usually data about data. If you're looking for like the epidata within data, that's like the opposite. So instead of like data within, instead of like data about data within the data that you're looking at, it's more like data that is like an aggregate that comes from like the aggregate of things. And I also think it's important to kind of like discover and know your own beliefs. Like there's so many people out there, and they don't even really know like what they believe. They don't even know like what like causes their own actions or causes their own behavior. Um, and and I think that's sad because it leaves them like to basically just like flow with whatever the more powerful people around them want them to do. Like instead of like being like instead of like having discovered their own beliefs and having discovered their own like values, they just like they're not really like grounded to anything like concrete, and so they can just kind of like flow around, uh, and they can kind of just they don't have any like real rules for their own behavior. They don't have any real like it's so like not really that hard to explain, but they don't have any like foundation to the things that are like to the things that are within them. They don't have any foundation to their beliefs. They don't have any foundation to like their behaviors. They don't really have any like limits to their behaviors. They don't really have any, and like that's really like dangerous. Like if you don't have any like limit to like what you do and what you are willing to do or not willing to do, or what you're willing to believe or not willing to believe. That's really dangerous because it can lead to a lot of like negative negative behaviors. And so And I think it's also important to kind of like have your own experience before trying to like understand, some of the writing of like the great thinkers. So, for example, like before reading Plato, it's important to like really like sit back and like reflect on like what it means to live and like what it means to be in our world and what it means to like you really need to like have your own thoughts about like all of this stuff, and then go look into the works. There's like so many people out there and they're like very smart, they're very intelligent, but like they just immediately start reading Plato. They immediately go towards like academia and like discovering exactly like uh, because they have this like huge like thirst for knowledge, so they like immediately go to like find and learn all of the knowledge that there is like in academia. But by doing that, they're like just like absorbing like the existing model of knowledge and accepting that as like complete truth, instead of like having their own thoughts and like thinking really really hard about a lot of these problems. And then uh, and then at that point, like everything they do or everything they think is based on what they already know, which is all like mostly true. Like the stuff in like Western and Eastern philosophy is like it's been debated for thousands of years, and like there's so many like great works out there that like all the great works from like Greece are still pretty much around, or a lot of them are anyways. And there's so many like great works from like the 16th, 17th, 18th, 19th, 20th centuries that like and people that like have like this thirst for knowledge go straight for that, and they like model everything that they do based on like what already exists. And so it all comes so easy to them, and because it comes so easy to them, they don't really spend very much time thinking about it, and they don't spend much time critically thinking about it. Whereas for me, like I never got into this stuff. Like I didn't read Plato until I was like 27 or 28. Or I didn't read the Republic, and that's pretty. Like I read like half of Ethics, and that's pretty much all the philosophy that I wrote or that I read. And but I've thought so much about it. Like I've thought long and hard about a lot of these problems, and a lot of like most of the time I didn't even realize what I was thinking about. I was just like beating my head against the wall to try and like resolve these kinds of like philosophical issues in my own head, and I didn't realize that like all of the things I was thinking about could have been like all of like the hard problems that I was thinking about. It could have been like so more easily like resolved had I just read Plato's Republic, or if I had read like John Locke, or if I had read like any of those other great works. And then another like important concept I think spend some time thinking about is like approaching like formlessness and the importance of like forms and like formlessness. So like there's this funny quote about metaphysics that's like I'll have to find it. Um, yeah, there it is. It is it's a hilarious quote. It says that metaphysics is a dark ocean without shores or a lighthouse, strewn with many a philosophic wreck. Basically, what they mean is that all these like philosophers have tried to tackle like metaphysics, and like everybody comes up with their own like means of like modeling something which is like invisible and intangible and basically like impossible to model. And that there's been like so many like people that try to like make this work and who fail, uh, because it's something that you can't like. It's hard to argue about because everybody can see it a different way because it's invisible. Like you can't see metaphysics, you can't look at it, you can't like. It's hard to draw it out. Like different people could like model the same metaphysical phenomena in different ways, and this is why I think really like math is a good way of modeling it, because like I don't know, if you study enough category theory, you know what I mean. But and so many people have tried to like solve these problems and have like failed. Just because they're hard problems to solve, it's easy to like make subtle distinctions that the other person like didn't really handle in their argument. And really, and I think it's and I think it's because like like multiple models may be correct, but like some of those models may kind of conflict, which is basically saying that like it's okay to have like logical like fallacies or whatever. And so with these like metaphysical models are full of things that like Plato calls like forms, and these like forms you see like over and over again. And so these like forms like show up like time and time again. These forms could be like the specific like paths that like a conversation may take or something, or like the topics that people might talk about, or like certain similarities between like it's so easy to just talk about like metaphysics, like, oh, it's metaphysics, but then you go to like explain it and it's like all like really abstract. But you kind of like as you live longer and longer, like you kind of like see some of these forms pop up. Maybe you even like talk to someone who's like very wise, and they kind of like like let you kind of like understand what these forms would be, or like how they would like interrelate, and how you can use them. You got like these like basic forms, and you got like forms of forms, and like, but then it all leads to this kind of like formlessness that like where like and it has a lot to do with the Tao Te Ching, which is another great like it's like a great like Eastern um, work of philosophy to read. Where did that go? Anyway. And so, let's see, what are the opening lines? The opening lines are the most famous. Something about, yeah. And this is really what I'm talking about. The like ineffability. Like it's like you cannot. It's these like metaphysical forms that are so highly removed from everything that they are ineffable. They cannot be described with words. Or if you come up with a model of like kind of describing them or how they interact, like it becomes like so complicated that no person could like really understand or comprehend like the full description of what you're talking about. And it's like this ineffability, and this is not that great of a translation. Yeah. The Tao that can be spoken is not the eternal Tao, and the name that can be named is not the eternal name. The nameless is the origin of heaven and earth. The named is the mother of myriad things. This is the most famous like stanza from from the Tao Te Ching, or Tao Te Ching. And so basically saying that like if you can describe it, it's not like the most eternal like the way that can be spoken is not the eternal way. Like Tao means way, like the path, or like the kind of like the method to doing something, and so like the way that can be spoken, or the method that can be spoken, is not the eternal method. And that's because like it's like when you get higher and higher and higher into these more abstract like means of like modeling behavior, or modeling like anything really, it becomes more and more difficult to state what those things are, and they become like more far removed from like things that we can relate to. And so, but that thing that is the most furthest removed, that is the nameless, is like the origin of heaven and earth. Is like the thing that is the furthest removed, the eternal Tao. It really is like the origin of all things. So that is like the metaphysical thing that is the furthest removed is like the origin of all phenomena. Um, and the named is the mother of the myriad things, and myriad means like various or like some like enumerated. It kind of it's talking about some kind of like enumerated set of things that we can all describe using like names. And as soon as you name something, it becomes even more complicated than these unnamed things, which is kind of interesting. Like as soon as you name like as soon as you make these distinctions, then like you can make so many distinctions based on like what you just modeled that like it becomes like so complicated. I don't even know how to explain it, but like you can see this in our own society. Like we're so obsessed with social media, and we've got like all these like materialistic things that we can obsess about, and you can obsess about those things and all the combination of those like material things. And because we have so many more like things to deal with in life, like everything becomes like so overcomplicated that we can't even really possibly relate to this nameless thing or like the eternal nature of things. We become so distracted with all these like myriad materialistic things that we've like lost our connection to the eternal Tao, or however you want to refer to it. Um, and that you can just like see that become more and more true every century, every decade. It just becomes so easy to be distracted with like things in life that and people have so little time. Like there's so little time and there's so many novel things out there that you can obsess about that no one has any time to really be a philosopher or to really like step back and like really observe things. And so it's interesting because like the more advanced we get, the more further removed we become from like the things that are actually most important. So and I've like written a blog about this basically somewhere. Something about ancient. Yeah, here it is. Ancient people's knowledge was far more advanced than we give them credit for, and quite often, like a system observed with less information is more simply understood than perceiving the same information with more info. This phenomenon results in man's misapprehension that our supposedly more acute vision of reality offers more complete comprehension. And just kind of want to like, and I think that like ancient people could have like understood that like they could have anticipated something like the internet without knowing like how those technologies would be possible like specifically, because they could have known that like they could have seen that like okay, the faster that our cities can communicate with each other, the more that gets done. So what if like that speed of communication drops to zero? Like what if people can suddenly communicate instantaneously? And you've got legends and myths about like telepathy, and like you can kind of look into like ancient myths on that. A lot of that stuff was like developed by like really intelligent people who were anticipating things that they couldn't really explain. Like they couldn't explain how something like telepathy would be possible, but like if you look at the internet, I mean that's basically like our implementation of telepathy. Like as soon as I tweet something, like there's like so many people that can read it, and as soon as I like instant message someone, there's so many people like I can talk to anyone in the world that I really want to. So, but my point is that by like anticipating those kinds of developments without really even knowing how they would specifically be possible, then ancient people could really like predict like how something, or they could predict how something like that would affect human behavior, or at least they could try. So it's kind of interesting to think about like how mythology would really affect things. Let's see, where was I going with that? And so, a little more of this. And so it's just kind of like a little discussion on like approaching formlessness, I think it's important to like become familiar with that, like eternal Tao, to become like familiar with like abstracting things higher, and higher, and becoming comfortable with like thinking about things without really dealing with like names or without dealing with named concepts, and kind of like looking at the similarity of different things, even though it may not seem relevant, but it's also very confusing. Like if you don't have to think about all this stuff, it's fantastic because like it's so complicated. It's like infinitely complicated, and it's very difficult unless you're like academically trained to like relate these things to other people. And so, how do we observe? Let's see. Oh, another good kind of a thing to think about, like how to observe. Like how do we observe others if we don't know how to observe ourselves? Um, Trying to like think about like where my head was when I was thinking about this. Oh yeah, so if we're like all one, like if we're all the same, like if we're all equal, if we're all like, um, yeah, if we're all equal and we look at someone else, like, then how can we really observe someone else if we can't honestly observe ourselves? So if I'm like, so if you got somebody else over here and you got me, and we're saying that everyone is equal, everyone is the same. Well, then how can I look at this person if I can't look at myself honestly? Like if I've said that everyone is the same, and I'm trying to like judge this person or like form opinions or thoughts about this person, and I've defined this person in terms of myself, then how do I know, like, if I can't honestly look at myself, then how can I observe someone else, or how can I really think about someone else? I think it's kind of an interesting road of thought to kind of follow. Let's see, tabula rasa, Zen, and the art of beginning. It's really important to observe yourself as you know nothing. Like if you're learning something new, and this is something that's like it's a lot easier to learn faster as you get older because you kind of abstract these like generalities and everything that you learn, and you kind of use those to allow you to learn a little bit faster. So let's say you're learning like breakdancing or something. You kind of like learn how to like move to the rhythm of the music, and then you think, oh, I want to learn like how to like pop and lock. Well, now like you can abstract the generalities there, and you can say, well, like, oh, like I already know how to kind of move to the rhythm. Now I just have to move to the rhythm in it with a different style. Or if you've like learned how to breakdance and like you want to learn how to do tricking with lots of flips, you can say, well, like I've like done these acrobatic movements. They must be similar in some way. And really, as you start to learn more and more and more things, you learn how like self-similar um, everything is. And so, um, but as you learn these things, it's very important because it's very easy to like accrue this like expert knowledge, and then you lose like the beginner's mind. And so, as you learn the next thing, you forget that you need to approach like new subjects. Like you kind of want to approach new subjects with like beginner's mind, so that you can like discard like bad habits, and you're less likely to hang on to those bad habits. And it's really difficult to do that because you already have like what you perceive as being like expert knowledge in some field or in some like hobby or whatever. And so how do you actually approach some subject like completely innocently or completely you know with a pure like a beginner's mind or with tabula rasa? Um, and how can you know how to do that, or how can you know to do that, or how can you know how to do that, like from the beginning? And if most crucially you need to observe yourself as you know nothing, like trying to think what I meant. These are like pre-writes. So, yeah, how can you observe yourself as though you know nothing if you like? How can you? So there's like this kind of like beginner's mind where like you have like the actual like tabula rasa, like you really don't know anything, and but then there's like you can kind of like maintain this kind of beginner's mind as you learn more and more, and and I really don't want to like speak about like some concepts as though I'm an expert because I haven't really studied Zen, so I don't really. I'm just like familiar with some of these concepts, so. Um, but like, how can like? There's a different kind of beginner's mind when you're like already kind of like an expert, and you're able to like approach things with a fresh mind. So you're able to like abstract the things that you already know and like just kind of like approach things with a fresh, pure, empty mind. Um, but as a beginner, without having experienced that, how can you know how to do that? Like, how can you know to do that? And how can you know how to do that if you're a beginner and you've never really experienced like beginner's mind? So that's kind of like a interesting thing to think about. And how can you know to do that unless someone has told you to do that? And that's what's like most. And it brings up kind of another not oxymoron, but another paradoxical like belief. Like the only way that you can be taught to appreciate beginner's mind as you're learning is if someone teaches you to appreciate beginner's mind as you're learning. So if somebody like imbues you with that knowledge when you're young or when you're a beginner, you can like appreciate that as you're learning things. But then that means that you don't really have a pure beginner's mind because somebody has like imbued your blank mind, your tabula rasa, with a set of knowledge that should equip you to uh, more appropriately reap the advantages of like beginner's mind, but they've still you know added something to your tabula rasa when before it was completely empty or completely clear. So kind of an interesting thing to think about. And yeah, how does one instill the art of observing the right things in themselves if they know nothing? These are kind of like classic problems that have been poured over and meditated on for millennia, particularly like the Zen things that I just mentioned, which stems from Buddhist thought, and that stems from like Hindu thought. This kind of brings me to my next point. Yeah, everything that has been done, everything that has been done countless times before. You'll find that like ancient math was developed that acted as like a basis for like ancient philosophic thoughts or philosophical logic and thought. And I feel like the Banach-Tarski paradox is incredibly important, and I believe that may have been developed in ancient times. I don't really know. Just because of like, see, like the ancient people like calculus, which wasn't really developed until like the 17th or 18th centuries by like Leibniz and Newton. Calculus wasn't really that important because people didn't understand enough about like physical systems. Like chemistry was more important than physics. Chemistry involved like a little bit of, you know, chemistry involves a lot of like logarithms and a lot of like but not really a lot of like calculus. Like physics involves a lot of calculus, but people didn't have any means of making the measurements that would have like allowed calculus to make a difference. Because you have to make like you have to be to in order for calculus to be useful, you have to be capable of making like very precise time measurements. And if you can't make very precise time measurements, then calculus will never really be important to you. But set theory and statistics and a lot of that stuff was in number theory and numerology. All of this stuff was incredibly important because set theory and numerology and like Monte Carlo statistics and stuff like that. Like Monte Carlo statistics would allow you to like approximate a value for pi, and that's not really why it's important. But Monte Carlo statistics would be incredibly important to like someone making a just deciding how to like allocate resources and like for an ancient kingdom or something like that. Like statistics. My point is, statistics would be incredibly important, especially if you could like come up with like relatively accurate statistics. It would allow you to constantly remain ahead of the curve, and it almost wouldn't matter like if someone like, I don't know, people could try to like plot against you, but if they could not accurately plan how things were going to go, and if they couldn't like, if they didn't have the resources to measure like how resources would be used, then you could constantly stay ahead of them by just estimating like resource utilization. So my point is like, statistics would be incredibly important in ancient times, and it wouldn't surprise me to find that like that kind of like math was like hidden and like obscured through like esoteric like occult like practices and stuff. And I don't know, that's kind of like dipping into like conspiracy theory stuff, and I don't really have any evidence of it or specific evidence of it, other than like, you can kind of like look at like different kinds of maths that people like developed and look at like the dependencies required to learn maths that were made public, and then assume that because those maths that were made public were around in like Babylon or in Sumeria or in Acadia or in ancient Hindi cultures, that like they must have depended on some maths which were not publicized. Um, I don't know. It's really like all that stuff. Like the evidence for most of it is long gone. So really hard to yeah. Anyway, it's interesting to think about because it would not surprise me to find that there's a lot, like ancient people knew a lot more than what we give them credit for. And moving on to the next thing here, which was I guess that's pretty much it with that. I don't know how I got on that tangent anyway, but and so it just interests me to think about like great people and how they kind of like think about things and like what makes them different than other people, and like uh, under what circumstances someone might have the qualities for greatness, but then like might not have like the posturing for it. Like they haven't like made the right accomplishments in their personal life, even though they do have uh, the right qualities for it. Um, it's kind of interesting to think about like what actually makes like someone like this like great. Like how do they learn it? Because it seems to be so rare. Um, so many people are just like happy with like what they can get that they don't really try to get any more. And so you can say that like people who have like received some of this like knowledge from like an aristocratic upbringing, like that's kind of like explainable. But then again, like being born into like an aristocratic upbringing is also like kind of like a bad thing because you're surrounded with so much like stuff that you're comfortable with that you never really have to try, and actually that makes like a huge difference. And it's really kind of sad actually. And so where is it that people actually learn to be great? And I think it's their father that kind of like first imbues that image, or maybe their mother as well. But I kind of like this interesting like upbringing where like I didn't really have a father, and so it's kind of like different people in my life tried to like fill that role to some degree and tried to like um, tried to like help me out, but I mean, it wasn't really the same thing. But I mean, it definitely helped a lot. And but so like when I got to be about like you know 20, 21, 22 or something like that, like I just didn't really know what I should do. And when I was in high school, I could have done a lot more with my life, but I didn't know why I should have been doing a lot more with my life. And so by the time I figured that out, like when I was like 25 or 26, then like it was kind of like too late. But I didn't really care that it seemed to be too late. I kept wanting to try anyways. Um, and it's really like this series of articles is really like a reflection on what I've learned. I didn't really have much of a clearly stated system given to me by my parents for life, but so I kind of had to like create my own, which is by no means complete. Um, And so in the series, I'm going to like kind of like explain concepts that involve like characteristics that can't really be explained. They can't they're like characteristics in themselves. This kind of goes back to like the formlessness, the facets that I'm explaining are like the surfaces of this like gem of like greatness. And so it's like the facets are like the things that you can see and touch, even though like to get deeper you have to go further and further in and get like further abstract. And really just trying to go with like the gem, like kind of like the gem like allegory there or whatever. Not allegory, but my brain right now is like not functioning. I'm glad that I already wrote this because otherwise like I'd be fucked. And so I really hope that by explaining this stuff, I make it easier for others to kind of relate to that intangible truth of becoming great. And you'll find that in life, there's a lot of people out there that like they have advice for you, but surely their advice is meant to make them useful to them while providing enough value to seem authentic. But you'll find that like they kind of like leave out like one or two things that like it would it would make it pretty clear that like their advice is more so meant to like make you useful to them. It's just kind of shitty, honestly. But I mean, everybody has their own agenda. Sometimes that'll bite you in your ass. Instead, I hope to arm you, with most all the knowledge that I would give myself or that I would give my kids or whatever. And a good rule of for ethical action in any case, and especially when giving advice to someone else, is the golden rule, which is to treat your neighbor as you treat yourself, or more radically, as I was stating, treat everyone as though they literally are you, as though we are all one. That by harming another, you're actually harming yourself. So. I think that's just a really good way to think of things. It's almost like it covers most all your bases, but then you got the corollary, of course, which is to treat yourself as you'd like others to treat you, and that's really important because a lot of people forget that like a lot of people are like people pleasers and they kind of forget that like really you are the most important person in the world. So I'd say your confidence is your most valuable asset, and you better know that people are going to try and steal. Are going to try and steal that too. So you really got to focus on yourself as well. But really, sometimes the best way to improve your own situation is by like giving to other people. So if you can do volunteer work, or like if you can't find a job or something, then if you can go do volunteer work, that's a good way for you to like feel like you're contributing to other people and to network and to like just like do good stuff for other people. I got signed up for like the Habitat for Humanity organization in this area, but I haven't really heard anything back. And I've tried to do a couple things, but like my life is so much more complicated or so unnecessarily complicated by the fact that I don't actually have like a car or I don't have a means of getting around between like 8 a.m. and 5 a.m. And like I can go anywhere I want, like usually after like 9 p.m. But then that means that I have to like wake up like at night, and that I can't even be awake when other people are awake. So like I like end up getting like isolated in so many ways from the rest of the fucking world. It's like so it's fucking annoying. It took me a long time to figure that one out, but and that's another thing. Just like watch for like people trying to isolate you or trying to like sever your connections to other people. Like there is like nothing that irritates me more than like thinking you have like a good friend and then or like thinking that you just met like someone who might be a really good friend, but then they come in and like you introduce them to people who are already your friends, and like unbeknownst to you, like you don't even see this, they're like sowing the seeds to like disconnect you from your like former friends. It is a like cookie cutter like cult technique to like fucking like try and sever your connections to other people, and it's fucked up. And here's some of these like general like subjects for some of the like the general facets of greatness. So like we'll start with quantification. So great people tend to quantify and measure everything. The next one would be like communication. The next one is signaling. Then knowledge, vision, story, identity, orchestration. This has to do with like strategy. And I might merge this with the legal system just because like I don't really think that really needs its own thing. But anyway, so back to quantification. Like great people quantify and measure everything. So without quantification, you really can't develop a system or hope to improve. You can't really specify like what a process would be or what a method would be without like measuring it in some way. And it's especially crucial to learn how to measure usage of time, because if you can measure usage of time, then you can improve that. That's something that I really need to focus on. And you also need to learn how to like quantify communication, information, knowledge, and social networking. Um, and communication. So these kinds of great leaders are all like conductors in the symphony of communication. They identify the most efficient means to relay messages so they can interface with the tree of people in their own organization as well as with people in other organizations. So everyone has like 24 hours in a day, and like I've heard this a couple times. Like it kind of makes me a little nauseous because I'm thinking like, yeah, everybody's got 24 hours in a day, and you have $24 million in the bank. So it's a little bit easier for you to like interface with other people and like pay them to do the things that you want. But that is true. Like everybody's got 24 hours in a day, and like the best leaders will figure out the most efficient ways to use those 24 hours in a day. And so if you don't have enough time to do all the things that you do, then you need to be a good salesman and try to like if you can't pay other people, to do those things, then you need to be a good salesman and like convince them why, it's like valuable for them to help you do the things that you want to do with your 24 hours. And you gotta like, and everybody's got like a limited amount of time here, and like it's really hard to convince other people to help you out. Even if you do have like fucking $100 million ideas, it seems to be really hard to fucking convince somebody that they want to make millions of dollars. Imagine that. And that's just really kind of like how I know, I guess. It's really like, it's like no one wants, it's like I smell really bad or something. Like nobody wants to get close to me. I guess I would say that's how I know. It's like, because really like nobody wants to get involved with me, and I don't understand. I'm like, so you're telling me that like you don't want to make $1 million? Like you're telling me that you don't want to work on a startup where like the thing that we would be doing is like working with like celebrities and getting them to record vocal samples? Like you're telling me that like you don't want to do that? Like I'm thinking like, really? Because we're gonna make a lot of money and we're gonna work with a lot of really cool people, and you don't want to do that? Are you retarded? Like it's like, no, that's not it. And then, so let's see, the best leaders network with power players who command their own subtree of the organization, and by doing so, they harness the sum of man hours available to their network for maximum efficiency. And that's a really like interesting way of thinking of things. And again, it goes back to quantification. Like you're thinking about like how you're gonna like harness the like the sum of man hours available to your network and to your organization. You got to think like, okay, like to efficiently communicate, I like let's say there's like 100 people in my subtree uh, of people in my organization. Like I'm like a manager, and directly in my chain of command, directly in the chain of command below me, I've got 100 people. Well, that means that every workday I can figure out. I can come up with a plan for them to execute 800 hours of work every single workday. But like if I only have 8 hours in my day, that means there's like kind of like a 1 to 100 ratio there. But so I've got to figure out like how do I communicate with the people that are networked to the higher up nodes in my own subtree. How do I get them to tell those people below me to do things and to make it, to get as much work and to get as much value out of my network as possible? Sometimes that might mean like interfacing with other like trees of your own organization or another organization. And so and yeah, so So everything, let's see. I really think, I mean, like, communication is huge. Like, if you can't, like, and that's one thing that I haven't, I feel like I could really improve communication if I was allowed to, like, work in a position where, like, I could communicate with people, like, often. Like, if that was my job to be, like, a product manager or something like that, you know, um, I could probably get pretty good at it because like I understand the job, like I understand the design challenges and everything of like programming, like and I understand like I'm really creative with like you know lots of aspects of products. Um, it's just really hard to get like a really good job, like if somebody has a good thing going on, like and it's obvious that that person has like a good project they're working on or a good product, then like a lot of like talented people are going to work on that. So like but then like it's like being a salesman is easy when you're selling like, a winning product. Like, you know what I mean? Like it's not hard. Like if you're a drug dealer, it's kind of like Dave Chappelle says, those drugs sell themselves. Like, what do you mean? What do you mean I'm selling drugs? Like people keep coming up to me asking me for drugs. Like I'm not selling drugs. These things sell themselves. Like if you have like a very like a clearly like a product with a clear advantage, it's basically gonna sell itself. And so, yeah, I guess being a good salesman in that position would mean ensuring that you get the most value out of your customers and ensuring that you maintain a high bandwidth communication with the organizations that you sell to, so that you can ensure that they're getting the proper level of service, that they're getting the right that they're getting the value that they deserve as a large customer, and you just got to make sure that you're structuring your deals so that they're beneficial to both your organization and their organization. So, but if you're going to be it's really hard to be. It's really hard for me to imagine being a salesman, like let's just say a VCR, cassette player salesman. Like if my job was to go door to door and sell like VCR cassettes, like the tapes and the players, like imagine how hard my life would be. Like so like being a salesman like of a organization that's just like on the top of their like market, not so hard. But being the salesman in an organization with a product that's like not doing so great, not so easy. And some people like a challenge. I don't know, but for me, like and it's not that I'm like considering a position in sales. It's just like, why would I want to work? Why do I want to do that? Why do I want to like? If I can see that like your business model isn't going to pan out, like, why do I want to like commit so much time to that product? And it's not that I'm like not willing to commit time to it. It's just like I can see just based on like your job posting that your shit's not going to work out, or it's in a really crowded space. And if you hire somebody, you kind of want them to come on and you kind of want them to be a cheerleader to some degree. You don't want somebody to come in. You don't want to hire somebody and then they come on and they're like, yeah, so I don't think your product's really going to work out. And that's not what I would say, but I'm like, I don't even want to be in that position where I gotta like fake it. Like, yeah, you're gonna win. My stock's gonna be so valuable. Probably. Like, and I gotta do that for like a year. Like, I don't know. I just don't like. I don't like faking it. All right, so signaling. Signaling is one of the most important things that you can kind of master because it allows you to execute a strategy without, having your opponents like pick up on it. And you gotta just kind of realize that everything around you is a part of a myriad of systems. And I wish somebody had told me this, or somebody had just kind of reached out and smacked me when I was younger, because like I didn't really understand signaling, so I was always being like kind of like one-to-one direct with like everything that I was trying to do, even though I realized that I was like competing with other people, and like And like now I kind of like understand it a lot more. But I mean, so everything around you is part of like myriad systems composed of countless feedback loops, yada yada yada. Like very kind of like focused on the uh, fantastical language there. And so signaling concerns with becoming aware of how your signaling is concerned with becoming aware of how your organization's words and actions will implicitly and explicitly affect those feedback loops. So it's kind of like an indirect, it's an indirect kind of communication, but it is really communication. And then you got like knowledge, which drives how you see a system compared to how others see the same system. And so the difference between your model and others' models kind of determines your belief that there is an opportunity where others see only risk. Yeah, I really need a better summary for that one. But really, the point is there that by like knowing like certain systems or subjects or whatever in more detail, like allows you to like get an advantage there, and then like from that advantage, you can discover that like the way that like the rest of the world sees how an industry is not actually the correct way to perceive that industry, or maybe you see how that industry is going to change in the next 5 years, and that's where you develop like the sense that there is an opportunity there. Like, okay, this industry is going to change, like so this is how it's going to change. People would think this is crazy to do right now, but then in 5 years they'll understand. Um, and in the meantime, I will have made a lot of money. Vision, that just kind of concerns like it's similar to like you need knowledge, like expert subject knowledge to kind of to develop the vision of where your organization or whatever is going to go, or where how your organization relates to the industry that you're in. And your vision is kind of like that idea of where things are going to go or where they should go, even if you're fighting a losing battle sometimes. Um, and then so you got like the story, and your story is like one of the most important things you can kind of develop. And everybody loves a good story. Everybody's got a story to their life. You can by listening to someone's life story, you can pick up a lot of details. It doesn't matter who it is. Everybody's made mistakes. Like everybody's made like very good decisions in their life. Some people just value um, certain common sense ideals, and the point is there's always something to be learned, and you can make your brand or your identity more relatable through your story. And your story sometimes like drives your vision and helps other people understand the why behind your vision, or helps them relate to your vision. And like examples of stories include like the Southwest Airlines cocktail napkin. That's like everybody mentions like go ahead and write down your idea on your cocktail napkin. Blah blah blah. The Steve Jobs story. I mean they made like two movies about that. Somebody wrote a book. It's one of the favorites. You got like identity. And that kind of like determines like how people outside your organization or whatever like perceive you, or how they perceive your organization. And so a lot of like these four things right here are really kind of like interrelated. They're kind of all intermeshed, but they're like different like facets of kind of like the same thing. Like your story kind of like helps like explain the why behind your vision, and your knowledge helps establish what your vision would be, and then all these three things kind of like if you can convey these to consumers, or convey them to customers, or convey these three things to people who might donate to your organization or whatever, then you kind of like cultivate your identity, and that's kind of like your brand. And then your knowledge kind of like helps you develop your strategy, which is part of a section that I'm going to write called orchestration. And this involves like how you're going to actually. It involves like how you can like deconstruct your grand plan for world domination into like little like chunks, and like you can just kind of like deconstruct it into like a plan. Into a plan that you would execute. Like, so I might have like, so the Splice.com. I always like going back to these guys because it's pretty good idea for a startup, if I might say so myself, because that's what I was working on for kind of a long time. But I'm not, and again, every time I like talk about these guys, I have to like say like, well, I'm not too worried about it because it's just a good idea. And here's my point. My point is, I had a strategy for how I was going to launch something like Splice.com, which is kind of like the GitHub for music. So GitHub is a place where people can do like people can work on like programming projects and stuff. Look, I got my I open source my brain on GitHub in case of robot apocalypse. People tried to like make some pull requests for my brain. Probably need them, but anyway. So Splice is kind of like the GitHub for music. So it's a place where like musicians can collaborate on different projects, and it's pretty awesome. They've got a community. But anyway, so my strategy for this was like, okay, so I want to be able to I was excited about this idea because it was one of those few ideas where I could like really maybe get it off the ground without anything more than seed funding. At least to like get it off the ground, and so my idea was to create I wanted to establish a platform eventually, and the platform was where like people could work on different projects, like the GitHub for music. But I was like thinking like, okay, like how am I gonna get there? Like that's a lot of work to take on at one time. Like how am I gonna get to the platform? Because the platform is what was going to allow me to like establish a marketplace for samples. Look what they did. How amazing is that? Like people can go download. They've got like a singular like marketplace for like sample sounds and like different instruments and plugins and stuff. So like my idea was to like get the platform, and then once I get the platform, I've got the customer base and like I'm like in touch with all my markets. Like I can like easily like market these other things on top of the platform, but I've got to figure out how to get the platform first. And so how do I get the platform? I was thinking like, oh, well, I'll like I'm going to create something called Oscillate or whatever. And I'm going to create like a platform for people to share sounds that they're working on, right? And so then by sharing the sounds, they can do these other things, but eventually it'll lead me to a place where like I can get some VC money or something. I can get some money, and I can build the platform from that, and then from the platform I'll have like the customer base that I need to be secure in launching a marketplace for sounds and plugins and stuff like that. And that was kind of like my strategy, and it was a strategy like I had the goals. Like the goal was like GitHub for music, the platform, and then I was like, okay, well, how do I really make money on that? Like the GitHub business model isn't so attractive. Well, then I was like, okay, I can make money by selling sound samples and like plugins or whatever. And so then like I've got these goals, and I'm like, okay, but I can't just like go straight from like 0 to like GitHub for music. Like I've got to like figure out like what order do I need to build things in so that like I can quickly get here. And it's just so frustrating that nobody ever nobody ever really like helps me. I was like, and I didn't want to tell everybody exactly what I was working on because it was like actually a good idea. And now Splice is worth like $100 million, if not more already. But I'm telling you, like if it's a good idea, somebody's gonna do it. Anyway, the point is like that was like my basic strategy. And strategies, you've got like strategies which are more like long term like goals, or ways to get to your goals. And then you've got like tactics, which are like like these little abstract things like that you can employ to like you can kind of like construct a strategy from these like abstract tactics to kind of lead yourself towards a goal. And I kind of want to talk about like the legal system a little bit because if you know how to like work with like patents and stuff like that, that's a huge advantage. But really, this talk is like about like how to like break through. I see a lot of these qualities myself, although I kind of like fear it's a little bit too late because like I've kind of made a lot of mistakes. And kind of becoming great and like freeing yourself from the chains of a normal life is quite rare. you'll find that it often requires like the coordination of one or two previous generations for someone to really like break through. And so, but does it require being born into a like an aristocratic lifestyle or whatever? And I don't really think it is. Or the upper middle class, I don't think that's really required. Does it require access to a network of the rich and famous? I don't really think it does either. Is it like a serendipitous opportunity, perhaps divine by fate? No. Although that is like very important to like be able to take advantages of the opportunities that were presented right in front of you. All those sometimes those opportunities and serendipitous looking happenstances might really just be setups, but who knows. So what does it mean to break through, and what does it take? So it's really quite rare. Talking about the success that is quite often 1 in 100,000. You'll find that like people born into wealthy circumstances can be quite stunted in their development, and similarly, those born into poverty often lack the resources or opportunities to develop. So I kind of view this as like a kind of natural selection for like psychology. It's really like the people who have like the perfect mashup of ideas, behaviors in their minds who become wildly successful, and the people who become wildly successful also happen to have like some really negative aspects to their psychology sometimes. But it's like the people who have the perfect mix of positives without the wrong kind of negatives who end up breaking through. And so like the memes and ideas, I don't mean like memes as in like pictures with words on them. I mean like memes as in like little like abstract like thoughts that like you can kind of like define as a thing, or like a form of a thought that you can substitute with like variables. It's like kind of like a it's kind of like trying to like define it's trying to like quantify thoughts across like large groups of people, and then it's combined with like memes are kind of like so it's a way of like quantifying thoughts across large groups of people, and then like combining like type theory with those thoughts to like parameterize them. So you can like with like one meme you can like substitute like different like factors as like a variable, and it still kind of makes sense, and it still kind of retains its kind of identity. Anyway, so that's what I kind of mean by memes. And so the right kind of memes and ideas develop in these people's minds, coupled with the perfect timing and just the right combination of serendipitous events that results in a mind that responds to more effectively extract the positives out of a situation without being restrained by the negatives. It's one that, coupled with the guidance of others, perfectly creates fertile situations in front of them. And so what's like the most important factor to creating the perfect artists and business minds? And in my opinion, it's like kind of like the structure of the minds of their parents and how those parents like raise their child. And often you'll look at someone's life and see that not only did the previous generation affect their upbringing, but the generation before that as well. And obviously this is something that can be easier to provide for. Or it's easier to provide for affluent families, but wealth is absolutely not required, and usually you'll find that it actually hurts. So instead, families that have struggled for a generation or two will develop a perspective and outlook on life, coupled with strategies for self-actualization and propagating that knowledge, which all contribute to greatly towards success in this natural selection of ideal psychology. And so the most important point for me to stress here is that there are so many small mistakes that someone can make that result in massive risks or costs to someone's career. And so the seeds for your career start when you're young, and every moment really matters, whether or not you realize that at the time or not. But and it's important to be a child when you're a child. Obviously, it's important to have a childhood. You can't just be like constantly focused on like everything's so serious, because like one important thing you got to learn is sometimes like it's important to not be so serious about things. And so there's some like early behaviors, beliefs, or actions which usually require like high maturity or parents' guidance or interference, and these can either make you or break you really. And some of these mistakes are like really easy to make, and you won't like it's a mistake that almost anyone will make. But this is what like it's like the natural selection thing. It's like almost all people will make these kinds of mistakes. Like some people just either they're not presented with that situation before they like mature enough to realize it's a mistake, or for some reason they're like one of the rare people that decide to not make that mistake. And so, and it's really easy to kind of like make some of these like seemingly innocent or harmless mistakes and just kind of like, you know, kind of like burn yourself for the rest of, it's like, it's kind of like smoking weed in high school or something, like, or smoking weed, like, smoking weed in middle school might be a better example. So, like, a lot of people do it, why not, and the reason why not is it's a mistake. Like, in middle school and high school, you kind of need to be, like, focused on, like, you know, like, preparing yourself for college and preparing yourself for life. And a lot of people just don't understand that, like, just hanging out and like screwing around and smoking weed, like especially in middle school or whatever, is just like a terrible idea because you, a lot of people that do that, they end up with being fine. A lot of people don't know how to control it, and they end up like with a broken life, like just like right out the gate, like before they even turn 18, and they don't even like realize it. And and there's a lot of reasons for that. Like one reason is because of the legal system. Like it probably shouldn't be so like detrimental for someone to make that kind of mistake early on, and you know, but then there are like the legal system there is really trying to protect young people against like ruining their lives, and you know, kind of sucks both ways. But my point is that it's usually impossible for most people to comprehend these unspoken rules at any point in their life. Sometimes, much less between like 15 and 25, which are really kind of like the critical years of development. But like, there's these mistakes that you can make, which are things that you shouldn't do, and then there's these like subtle things that like you really should do, or that can really help you develop your personality or self-actualize or develop your social network or whatever. And those things they're things that people don't really know to do. So it's like a combination of like mistakes that people make that they shouldn't do, and then there's like these things that people don't know to do that they don't do. And so anyway, so they either approach life they don't approach life with these goals in mind and miss the opportunity, or they break these kinds of rules and they lose the opportunity. However, it's really important for me to state that there is not a singular ideal psychology, and in fact, you'll find that there's this great kind of success that's you'll find that this great kind of success, or this kind of great success, is often an ironic curse, and it can bear like a terrible price, and one might struggle for it, never to achieve it. For me, I've been so singularly focused on building a product and refusing to give up that I've basically destroyed my life. But I don't really regret it. I just kind of knew that like that was going to be like I really might not never make it. I kind of knew that was a price. Like I was the risk. I was like, I can like try to play my cards safe and like build up like $20,000-$50,000 of seed money, and then maybe in 5 years I'll be able to like I'll be able to really do this. And I just didn't want to play it safe because I really believe that in like 2 or 3 years, there's really not going to be much of an opportunity to build one of these products because almost everything that could be done will be done, or almost everything that could be done will only be within the reach of those people who already have money. So, and people just don't fucking get that. Like, they're like, well, David, why don't you fucking go work for like, 2 or 3 years and save some money up, huh? That's what I did when I was a youngster. I saved up money. And I was thinking, like, have you seen, like, the interest rate? Like, first of all, not the interest rates. Well, yeah, the interest rates with the rate of inflation. But anyway, my point is, like, the opportunity, in my opinion, is just not going to be there. Or the opportunity is going to be so significantly different that, like, any kind of, like, major business that would be launched in 10 years or 20 years would be, like, the equivalent of, like, trying to pull together money for, like, to, like, fund, like, Intel, or like to like fund like a major like corporation like that. The opportunities that are going to be available are like nanotechnology and like VR, and like they all include like very advanced math, and it's very hard, and like it's going to be a lot more difficult. It's not going to be like the opportunities aren't going to completely vanish, but right now the opportunity is just like there's like this new mobile platform, and like everybody's like building these apps for it, and now that everybody's like figured out that they can make so much money from doing this stuff, like everybody's jumping on and like crowding it out. And I mean, VR is a similar platform to like mobile. It's like a similar development in that, like, hey, here's this like platform, and you can build apps and experiences for VR, and then you can market and sell those apps and experiences. But it's different from like mobile development in that, like, one, like people have been through this kind of like launch of a platform before and are much more familiar with monetizing it. Therefore, it's going to be much more crowded out. And two, it's much more complicated to get into, and it takes a lot more work to develop for, because now like you're developing for an interface that is not like 2D, it's like 3D, yeah. So there's a lot more like the space is like literally like more complicated. Instead of just being like a phone, it's like a it's a two-dimensional surface. It's like it's a three-dimensional virtual space. Um, Anyway, so another good quote that I like is that fools learn from experience, and I prefer to learn from the experience of others. This comes from like Otto von Bismarck, who advised Kaiser Wilhelm, like the first or whatever, to to build railroads to his enemies, so that so that when like World War I came around, they could just like truck their supplies on out there. Anyway, it's kind of funny. It's kind of funny. It's really not. And I don't know that they only did it just to like use it for wartime, but like basically this guy Otto von Bismarck and Kaiser, like in like the mid to late 19th century, they were like convincing all the people around them to let them like build railroads out there for like purposes of like to build railroads to their cities for purposes of economic development. And then when like war hit, they would use those railroads as like supply lines, and like totally like, because like maintaining supply lines is like a big uh, it's a big like objective in war. It's like a recurring theme in war. Like if you can't like as for it, as you're for like an empire like Rome or whatever, like as they became more and more spread out, like they had to like maintain supply and communication lines that became longer and longer. And as that happened, as they spread more and more and more, then it became harder to maintain those lines. Then those the supply and communication lines would become disrupted, and then you'd have like detached like segments of the Roman Empire kind of like operating on their own and not receiving supplies, and then that affects their loyalty and blah 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 blah. Anyway, maintaining supply lines is kind of like a recurring theme, and you have to be able to like you have to know like, okay, what supplies are these people going to need? What can they like obtain there? How is that different? How does that reflect against their availability of supplies? Like, are they really going to need the specific things that we're going to send them, or can they like meet those objectives on their own? And like what could happen between here and there that would interrupt this supply line? What if these supplies got in enemy hands? Blah 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 blah. Like, and so because if you can't feed your troops, or if you can't pay your troops, or if you can't like maintain their will to fight, for other reasons, then you can't really do anything. Um, and then those become like major like tactical like objectives. Like if you know that both sides are going to need to maintain their supply lines, well then if you can cut if you can cut some of those supply lines off, or slow them down or whatever, you can imagine how that might affect. Or if you can get information about their supply movements, blah blah blah. You can sort of like disrupt their operations and kind of like throw them into like just a little bit of like chaos that might give you an advantage, or might like that lots of implications from various like military tactical actions. Anyways, that's all I just wanted to talk about. Even though I really don't know, like I'm only like talking about like things that I've like observed by reflecting on these subjects on my own. But anyway, so there's some of these like nuggets of advice that kind of like go against my own ideas of like what it means to be a virtuous person. So I can't stand like playing to appearances or adhering to many of the other so-called like rules of power, which is kind of a book that I detest, by the way. And if you click on like the Wikipedia thing, you'll go to the Wikipedia page and it'll be like, this book is really popular with like people from Hollywood and prison inmates. And just like a little warning. And so I'm really only mentioning that because like it's worth reading if you want to defend yourself against its tactics. But please keep that in mind. A lot of the stuff is just like pure like fodder for like sociopaths. Really, like you just like it's stuff that like if you don't know about, you're gonna find yourself like being really chummy with some really shitty people. Is like because I've like noticed some of these tactics being used against me myself after I already knew him. And this guy was acting like he was going to be my best friend. And he really just kind of wanted me to go along with some shitty stuff. And I was thinking, like, buddy, I read that book. There's a book with all the tricks in it, and I read it. Like, I already know that one. Um, and so, also, the knowledge of power spreads fast like fire. A lust for power can corrupt men who would otherwise remain virtuous by tempting them with the desire to reshape the world around them, often at the cost of sacrificing their character, their ethics, or their friends. Um, this stuff, I'm not kidding, it's like evil. It is evil. It is like living in a world without this is like paradise. Like, if you don't have to think about this stuff, it is like fucking paradise. And that's kind of another problem, is that like our world is changing to one where like these rules of power are very important, and like a lot of people aren't used to it. And so a lot of really good people are just kind of getting thrown by the wayside just because they're not used to it. One of these rules is to guard your reputation with your life, basically. And one thing that somebody needs to avoid is well, since maybe I should rewrite this. Since becoming great requires a lot of exposure and often courting someone's attention who would, in a way, like vouch for you, then you need to guard your reputation with your life. And your reputation is like a kind of like currency, which you can accrue over time or you can squander in a moment. And so for me, I picked drug legalization, which was like one of the worst causes that you can pick for your reputation because it led to so many doors being slammed in my face. Although I can't really regret saying that can't really say that I regret supporting it. I'm just saying like it's just like I squandered my reputation and I lost opportunities. Like basically, no one would like let me like be a mentor for like to like teach kids like jam skating because like I did drugs and I was kind of public about smoking weed. I wasn't really public about anything else, and I never knew that I was like missing out on the opportunity to like teach other people how to skate, which just meant that like as soon as like I stopped skating, there was like no one. There's like literally zero people in like Roanoke that jam skate, and we went from like being like in 2006 we were like one of like the best cities to be like jam skating in, and now there are like literally zero people there that are skating. Um, and there's like a lot of people in the world that are like they're experienced, they're like 50 or 60 years old and they might like look old or whatever, but like they have been through the game and like they know how to like fight without seeming like they're fighting. Let's put it that way. And so like they know how to like help you grow, and they also know how to like act like they're friendly and not help you grow. So and your reputation is going to like be important for establishing connections and yeah, like, you're going to want to like establish connections with people who can like offer you opportunities. And if for some reason your reputation is marred with something essentially meaningless, then it really sets you back. And another one is like to keep your circle tight. So like getting that big break often requires getting the approval of other already successful people who equally desire their reputation to They kind of desire their reputation to be protected. Um, and they really appreciate that they're already secured position, and so those people will want to vet anyone that gets close to them, and they already have like a set of friends who've proven their trustworthiness and are really wary of letting people in. And so similarly, you need to keep your circle tight. So while new people can sometimes bring opportunity or value, they often come bearing rotten fruit, especially if you don't vet them. So it's like really important to kind of like come up with like a you got to be able to like quickly run them through like a gambit. I've been ran through this gambit before, like, and it's really like it's surprising like how good some people are at this. Like they really know how to like kind of like quickly like determine. They'll test you with like 50 different things, and if you don't pass like 45 or 47 of those things, then like they'll still be nice to you, but you're not really going to get close to them. Um, and so they'll just like kind of run people through that and understand how like you're going to react in various simulation situations um, that how they're going to react in various similar future situations. And that's like all while appearing approachable and non-judgmental. And so all of this contrasts my own values because like I like hanging around like whoever, and I don't want to like restrict who I come into contact with, and I like being exposed to like all kinds of people, regardless of whether they would be positive or negative. Mostly because I want to learn about them. And isolation also bears a cost. And if you're around people who you've carefully chosen, can you really say that you know people? And living life in such a guarded manner, is it really worth it? Then again, if you made so many sacrifices in your life and you've remained calculated and guarded for so long, are you really willing to bring somebody in who could disrupt all that? Like, if you made so many sacrifices to like protect your positioning and everything, and protect your reputation, and ensure that you'll be able to get future opportunities, and you've spent so much time like training, and you're really just not going to want to let somebody in that's just going to like screw all that up, or who doesn't like respect that equally. Like um, that's how it is. It's fine. I mean, like I completely understand that, but so in summary, there's a lot of people I know that kind of like scoff at my attempts to build a product, or they say that I haven't really put the work in, or blah blah blah. Some of them laugh at my ideas, or they just laugh at me, or like, and like I'm used to it at this point. Like I don't really care anymore. Like laugh at me all you want. Like I don't care. Like let's see you do something then. Like um, and some will like try to like prove they'll like point towards my reputation or past failures, or they'll claim that I don't have the communication skills, whatever. They'll discount me in any way, but they won't actually help me. And so if somebody asks you to write like 15,000 words on the factors required to be a great leader, then what would you say? And if somebody asks you to speak for 3 hours on the subject, what would you say? Like let's see you do it. If you want to criticize me so much and act like I have nothing, and act like I just spout nonsense, let's see you fucking talk about it then. And not one person has really contributed more than like an hour to any like product idea that I have, which like I just don't understand that. But for all my like viable business ideas and all my quirky tech ideas too, like I haven't been able to identify a single person who seems to want to be a co-founder. And a lot of this is like my own fault, so like I really need to be hesitant and like throwing too much like blame out there to like other people, because I haven't really been spending enough time networking. But then a lot of like that is like maybe kind of my fault, and also kind of not my fault, because I don't have any means of transportation, and it's like pretty clear that like I'm like isolated and I don't have enough people to talk to. I'm like a fish trapped in a really small pond, and I like it here in Roanoke. I think it's a great place for some businesses and stuff, and I think there's a lot of opportunities here. But for some reason, like, I don't seem to be getting any of those opportunities. I really think that somebody should just fucking write me a check for $500,000. I really do. I would feel a lot more comfortable doing that if I had like two other people on my team. But I would know what to do with that money. What I would do is probably move to New York, honestly. But and so that's why nobody in Roanoke can write me a fucking check. I may be able to do it in like Blacksburg, but I really need somebody who's like, I need to be able to find developers, like programmers that just like they have like they can like quickly put together like uh, kind of like big data like stream driven like machine learning like frameworks and stuff, and like people who have like a lot of experience with multimedia programming, and who like when I ask them about Clojure, they're like, yeah, man, that's like my second favorite programming language besides Haskell. Like, if I could find somebody like that, that would be like my best friend. Instead, like, I don't really want to make too many statements because like I'm sorry, like I will never accept that I'm like good enough at anything. Like I will always want to learn more, and so I'm always gonna try to like find what someone else has to offer in terms of knowledge. And I'm always going to click with people that like I can tell are like really experienced. Um, and so I see a lot of these qualities in myself. Like I really feel like I understand a lot of the stuff. I feel like there's a lot for me to learn, of course. But I've made a lot of many of these qualities I kind of like observed and learned too late, as I've already made like far too many mistakes. That's not to say that it's impossible, but I believe that others can like draw on this the experience of your mistakes, and I feel like if I share that experience, then many of those problems, even though they're embarrassing or whatever, they can be the effect of those problems can be lessened, and so I'm just going to get into like quantification here. Hear me. Actually, I'm going to take a little break. Oh wow, I got 73 views. I'm going to take a little break, and then I'm going to come back and finish up each one of these parts. Just kind of want to get like a clean run through on these videos, and then hurry up and finish and publish this writing. It's like 10,000 words that I haven't really I've written. I need to like vet it. I need to do a couple more hours. I kind of have writer's block right now, and I'm not quite as like not when I write, the language I'm using, like the vocabulary and stuff, just isn't quite as like good as I would. It's just not there sometimes. But anyways, I'm hopefully gonna finish this pretty quick, and then also this one, and then I've got like 100,000 words of content that I haven't published, or I've got like 400,000 words of content that I haven't published, like in my head, and then I've got like 50 or 60,000 words that I've like written out that I haven't published. I've got a lot of stuff within me, and I feel like it's all gonna like. I feel like either I'm gonna get a job and then I'm never actually gonna like put this stuff out there, or yeah. Hopefully it doesn't get just like completely nulled out, because that would be a shame. Alright, be right back in about 10 minutes.